Praise the Lord. I trust you're doing well in the Lord today. So, today I want to talk a little bit about the attacks that the devil launches against people who pray in tongues. Now, one of the things that I normally insist a lot is that when you are praying in tongues and when you have the gift of praying in tongues, by default, you are already in the army of the Lord. Because basically, praying in tongues is a weapon that God gives to us to overcome the evil one. So, given that you have a weapon to fight the evil one, it goes without saying that the evil one will actually come after you because you are in a battle with the evil one. Now, some believers probably they don't know that they are actually in a battle with the evil one, because there are some believers who assume that the enemy doesn't attack them or like the enemy has nothing to do with them. But actually, as long as you are not like in the camp of the enemy, he is always going to have some scheme against you, because there is not a single human being that the enemy doesn't try to at least deceive and destroy. That is what he does from the very beginning of someone's life to the very end. So, given that you are already in a position where you at least know God, and two, you can pray, and you have received the Holy Spirit and the power to pray in tongues, you are already in a better position to actually stand up against the evil one. Now, the only thing that you just need to know is that you need to understand the common tactics that the enemy uses against praying in tongues believers, so that at least when you know these common tactics, you can do as much as you can to try and make it difficult for the enemy to use any of them to get to you. Because truth of the matter is that there are many praying in tongues believers who still lose when they go into a battle against the enemy, because the enemy gets an upper hand, probably because they don't even know that it is the enemy who is attacking them, or sometimes they're just clueless about what the enemy is actually using against them. So the first thing that pretty much you should be very, very careful about, like this should be the very first thing that you check, and that is the family that you are born in, or like the lineage that you are born in. Given that we are human beings, we began from somewhere. Like all of us who are living today, we all have parents, and those parents had parents, and those parents had parents. So there is some lineage that we have come from. And without even doing any further mathematics, you can easily just know that all of us came from Adam and Eve. And from Adam and Eve, we already know the weakness that they had, the one that the enemy used, which was their inclination to sin. So that sinful inclination, of what typically the Bible calls the flesh, given that you are born in the flesh, you are like by default, you are subject to the temptations of the flesh, which of course Adam and Eve were the first people to suffer. So because we are born in that lineage, by default, that is going to be the first thing that we have to take care of. Now, the enemy also knows that. The devil also knows that. And so when he is coming up against someone who is good in prayer, like someone who prays in tongues, he will typically begin by looking at like your lineage and to see any of the weaknesses that your parents had, because this is how the devil thinks. If the parents of a child have a particular weakness, you see, God has given parents the responsibility to teach their children the laws of God, to understand the ways of God. So if a parent doesn't understand a particular law about God, they are not going to teach their children. And that also means their children will not know that law. And that also means they will also be very likely to break that law that God has set. So the enemy knows that if a parent makes a particular mistake, it is almost guaranteed that the child will also be in the same sort of pitfall. So what the enemy does is he just studies the lineage of a person and then identifies the weaknesses that parents had or grandparents had, and then he brings it against the child. So it becomes a lot easier for the enemy to know how to attack a particular person. So he knows which temptations to actually bring your way, and also how to deceive you based on the weaknesses that he has identified. Now you see, like from all of us being human beings, by default we are all like subject to those inclinations of the flesh, like the desires of the flesh. We all desire like things that are contrary to what the spirit desires. And you see, that desire is a natural thing. That one is not brought by the enemy. That desire, we are born with it because our parents were born with it. So all through our lives, as long as we are in this physical body, we are going to have those temptations. That is why even Jesus, the time that he lived in this physical body, he also had the same like physical temptations. And you see, when the devil came to him with those temptations, the thing that Jesus did was that he overcame those temptations because he knew the enemy would come with those temptations. Now, you have to understand that the enemy is very systematic in terms of attacking people. He begins with what is very obvious. So he will basically begin with that inclination of sin, like your natural inclination. So he will basically just sort of incite you to follow your natural passions that are ungodly. And the Bible has talked about many of them: immorality and drinking, like drunkenness, and like stealing and coveting, adultery, those kind of things. So you see, the Bible has already mentioned them because they are the very basic, like very common, that affect almost every human being. Now, once the devil realizes he cannot get you with those kind of things, he's going to go a notch higher. So basically, he will now start digging a lot deeper into your lineage. So as much as we are all from Adam and Eve, we all like the lineage after that. Of course, there are children that come from them, and then lineages start changing. So that is where now he starts to focus. So this is why I typically tell people, anytime you are having attacks in your life, before you even think of why you are having those attacks from the enemy, the first place you need to check is your family lineage. Like, that is the very first thing that you need to begin with. And the two questions you need to ask yourself is, one, are my parents upright people who follow God, or were my parents upright people who followed God? If the answer is yes, then you ask yourself, did they face this temptation? If they faced that temptation and they didn't overcome it, then you know that it is your responsibility to actually overcome it. If they faced that temptation and overcame it, then at least you know that they set a good foundation for you to like prevail over it. And typically, if your parents taught you the ways of the Lord and good foundations, then it means that it will be very difficult for the enemy to get to you. So he will typically not want to use the family sort of strategy. He will go for some other strategy that I'll share with you. But that one of family is the very beginning. Now, when the enemy is using the family like lineage to sort of attack you, many people assume that your parents have to be wicked people for the enemy to use them against you. But actually, the enemy does not necessarily need your parents to be wicked for him to use them. Basically, he only needs you and your parents to have some sort of disagreement or anything that is not perfectly aligned between you and your parents. So your parents may be born again believers. They may be people who actually love God, but probably your parents don't believe that actually God gives people what? Assignments in life for them to do. So you see, that sort of a thing, the enemy will take advantage of it. In that, when now God speaks to you probably to follow a particular path that he wants you to follow, then the devil goes to incite your parents, because your parents naturally already believe that God does not give people specific assignments. People should live the way they want to live. So when you start telling them that God has called you to do a particular thing, that he has a particular assignment for you, that you have to leave their home and go to a particular place to serve people there, you see, by default, they are going to be like unhappy with you. And that unhappiness or that sort of resentment towards you, the enemy just takes advantage of it. He incites them and then he brings them up against you so that it becomes very difficult for you to follow the ways of God. And that is how that war will actually ensue. And you see, in that sort of a case, the enemy has an upper hand, in the sense that God has already commanded us to obey our parents. So the devil will actually be telling you to obey your parents when he actually knows that your parents are dissuading you from following God, because he knows that your parents have not really learned that children need to follow God, or like people have a specific purpose that God may call them to go and serve, and they may have to go and serve. So you see, in that kind of a case, it may leave people a little bit confused whether to continue whether to continue serving, like to continue with the path of God and the call of God, or to obey their parents and abandon that call. But typically the right thing to do in this case is basically to leave your parents. This is why now God gives that provision for children to leave their parents. So anytime you start having disagreements with your parents, don't try to fix those disagreements, because the enemy will use them against you. So all you need to do is just pack your things and leave. That is why you see even God telling Abraham to pack his things and leave his father's land. And you see there are many other examples of people that God typically told to leave their family before God began using them, because God understands that if he doesn't ask you to leave your parents before he starts using you, there are going to be instructions he's going to give to you that he is very sure the enemy will go and incite your parents against you. And you will find yourself in that dilemma of, do I obey my parents and disobey God, or do I disobey God and obey my parents? But because God thought ahead of it already, he put in place that people should leave their parents. Now, that is something you need to know. So if you are having issues in your life, or maybe you are having, you are a little unsettled and you are having issues with your parents and you are an adult, the first thing that you need to do is just try as much as possible to move away from your parents. Don't try to fix those things. Those things will fix themselves the moment you move away from your parents. It is a little painful, it may be disappointing to your parents, and it may also hurt your feelings, but it is the right thing to do. And at least you will make sure that the enemy doesn't use that avenue to attack you. So especially if you are a praying in tongues believer, you are a bigger threat to the enemy. So he is going to double down on any sort of loophole that he can get. Now, the second thing that you need to be very careful about, and the second tactic that the enemy uses in very many cases, is in places where you are having some sort of transition. Now, in the typical lives that we live, there are going to be many transitions, and in very different areas, relationship-wise, financial, or any other sort of areas in our lives, there are going to be transitions. Now, anytime there is a transition, the thing that happens is that you move from a place of structure, you are going to a new place where there is a new structure or there is no structure. So basically, you are going into a place of sort of lawlessness. So there is no law guiding how you operate there. Now, when you get there, before you start setting laws of how you will live there, you have to learn the place, or you have to learn that new level, or you have to understand the new surroundings. Now, the enemy takes advantage of that sort of a situation because he knows you don't have firm rules yet. So it is easier for him to actually sneak in and start to deceive you as early as possible before you learn of the things that you actually need to learn to live a godly life in that place. So this is why you will see, like anytime you want to have some sort of transition, God is typically going to charge you up to pray, sort of pray a lot before you go into that transition. Now, the reason why he requires you to pray a lot before you go into that transition is basically because he wants you to be properly covered in the spirit. Because you see, the more you pray, basically the more the fire around you increases, or like the more the fire of God in you increases. So if you have come from a period of intense praying, then generally you are going to have a lot of fire around you, and it will be difficult for the enemy to get close to you. So God wants you to be in that state when you are going through a transition, so that it gives you enough time to start setting rules before the enemy can get access to you and start to deceive you, or to try and dissuade you from the ways of God. And also, when if you are very careful, anytime you have some sort of transition, there is usually some sort of discouragement that comes, in the sense that starting to build something afresh or from scratch is going to be a lot difficult. So take an example of someone who was doing a job, and then God asks them to leave that job to go and serve in ministry. So you see that sort of a transition. The moment this person obeys God and actually goes into that ministry, you see starting from scratch is going to be very difficult because now they are not used to the new routine. They have to change their mindset and change quite a number of things. And you see, it is not an easy thing to do. It is difficult and discouraging. So the enemy takes advantage of that and discourages people so that people will actually start thinking of going back. Now, a good example, remember that case of the children of Israel when they were leaving Egypt going to the promised land. You see, the enemy also took advantage of that transition that they were in. And you see, he managed to actually incite many of them against God. And they murmured against God. And some of them even thought of going back to Egypt. And they cast even what? The man whom God had appointed to lead them to the promised land. Many times they turned against him and so many things. But you see, all that drama was happening because these people were in a place of, like, they were in that transition and they didn't really know what to do. So there are going to be seasons when God will give you the grace to pray in tongues a lot more, or even when you know that you are going to some transition, either getting married or you are going to get into ministry, or basically just any change, or even things like getting a new baby. Because basically when you get a new child, what is going to happen is that there are going to be a bit of changes to your routine and how you operate, and that little change is still enough for the enemy to try and use it against you. So any sort of change, always be prepared to know that the enemy will bring some discouragement and try to take advantage of it. So if you are someone who prays in tongues, be very careful with your family lineages, and also be very careful with those sort of transitions. So you may be there and you are asking now, how do I use the gift of praying in tongues as a weapon or as an advantage in these sort of cases? Well, in the first case, if you are from a family that has a lot of chaos, the first thing that you need to do is move away fast. That should be the first thing. Don't start praying against the things that are affecting you in your family when you are still living with those people, or like you are still in that particular family. You have to leave first. If you don't leave and you start praying against those things that are affecting you from your own family, it is very easy for the enemy to just incite those people against you. Because naturally, when you begin praying against those things of the sins of your ancestors, what is going to happen is that the enemy will naturally incite those people against you. And because you are praying against those particular people, you will naturally also have some sort of disgust towards those practices or like those routines and the things that they were doing. So because you will not be at peace with those things that they were doing, naturally there will just be that sort of conflict, and it will make your life very difficult to do anything. So the wise thing to do, the very first thing that you need to do is move away by all means before you even begin praying against those things. So once you are away, then you have sufficient time to pray against those things and minimize any sort of attacks, and the enemy will find it very difficult to use any of those people against you. Now, if you are going into some transition and you want to make sure that the enemy doesn't get to you, dedicate some time and pray in tongues, a lot more than you normally do. So if you typically pray for 1 hour per day, try and do a fast and maybe do 2 or 3 hours per day prior to that transition. If it's a big transition, then do a lot more praying. If it is a small transition, you can just take a day or two to pray and just get yourself in that mood of basically you are just in that consecrated mode so that the enemy doesn't get so much room to get to you. Because for me, I do remember I have also gone through several transitions in my life. The most recent one was, of course, getting married. And you see, prior to getting married, I remember the Lord put it in my heart to do a 90-day fast. So the 90-day fast, I was basically supposed to eat 1 meal a day and pray in tongues. And actually, I was to pray in tongues for 6 hours per day. And so I did that, but after about, it was almost close to 50 days. It was about 46, 47 days. And then I decided to stop. And of course, after stopping, I did face quite a bit of backlash. And I knew I was facing that backlash because I had not completed the 90 days that God wanted. Because honestly speaking, it was difficult. I had never done a 90-day fast. The longest fast I had ever done prior to that one was like, I don't know, 21 days. And the 21 days was actually one meal. And I wasn't even consistent. And we were doing as a church. But to be consistent and do it every day, I had never really done a fast longer than 7 days. So I lost discipline along the way. It is very like typical for human beings. It's the human nature to lose focus, and for such kind of a long fast, I wasn't surprised with myself that I actually lost the focus along the way. And you see, the enemy also loves those kind of things. He can allow you to fast, or like you can begin with a lot of power, and then he sees that I cannot stop this person at this time. So what do? Let me wait until after like about a week or two, because he also knows how much vigor you have. So when he sees that probably you are getting comfortable with the fast, and you are not as careful as you were at the beginning, then now he begins like coming to try and dissuade you from actually praying. And he uses some very convincing language. That one I have to also tell you. Because you see, they're going like he's going to bring things like health concerns. He's like, you are getting too thin, you are losing so much weight, you need to eat for you to get strength to pray. You see, like he's actually telling you to like eat so that you get strength to pray. But of course, he knows that when you eat, then of course you will lose confidence and courage to pray because you will have broken the fast. And then he also loves like piling guilt on people. So basically what he will do is that he will come and deceive you to like eat once, or like maybe you wake up on a particular day and he says, take tea, take tea, take tea, just tea alone, don't take with any snacks, just tea alone. Then when you take that tea, of course you start feeling a lot more hungry, because now your stomach is up, like it has that optimism of food coming. And then now you start feeling very hungry and you say, maybe I should add some snack. And then he says, just one snack, don't eat too much, just one, just one. And you see, when he says just one, you will typically assume that it is the Holy Spirit telling you or limiting you not to eat too much, but it's actually the devil who is just like playing with your psychology to make you think that he is actually on your side, or like he's wishing you well. But the moment you take that one snack, then of course, what does he do? He comes now to pile guilt on you and says, you have broken the promise that you made to God. And he quotes for you scriptures that say things like, do not make vows to God, and if you make a vow, you must fulfill it. And then he piles guilt on you, and then before you know it, you are at a point where you are feeling discouraged to pray. You can't even pray in tongues, or you pray in tongues and the tongues feel dry, and a lot of confusion sets in. So those kind of things do happen, but you have to be very, very careful. Now, the thing that I would typically say is that it is very difficult to be perfect as a human being. It is possible, but very difficult. Taking my own case of like the fasts that I have done, the fasts are rarely ever consistent. Like I never feel like motivated to fast from the beginning to the end. In very many cases, I'll feel motivated like the first 2 days, and then that motivation will either drop, or sometimes it may completely disappear on some of the days. Because like that 90-day fast that I was doing, I remember like the first week was extremely difficult, because praying for like 6 hours a day, I was not used to it. And of course I had to like alter my routine big time, because I had to alter my routine quite a lot, because I needed to accommodate in the 6 hours of praying. So generally, I was trying to do at least 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening, so that I can do the rest of the activities of the day in between. But there are days that waking up to pray for those 3 hours is just so difficult, and you just feel so tired, and you are like, haven't I prayed enough? All those prayers I have made, are they not enough? I mean, it is just marriage. Is it not like I know people who are married and they didn't pray this much? Why must I pray this much? And you see just so many thoughts flood you. And you see those things, as much as you may resist them for a few days, on some days they are going to weigh you down and you may feel a little discouraged. But you see now, as a good soldier of Christ, you know you have to keep pushing and keep going. And even on some days, you may actually fail to have the time to pray as you have set yourself to pray. But will you have the strength to continue praying after a typical like bad day or a day that you didn't actually keep the routine that you wanted to keep? So that one now comes down to your character, and it just depends on who you are and what you have decided. And you see, if you give up along the way, it is up to you. You are going to face some consequences. That one, be assured of it. So it happens many times. We are human beings, but of course, the right thing to do is to always remember to fight and stand strong as much as we can. So that is a little bit of what I wanted to share today. I hope you found it helpful. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments. If it is a private question, you can send it on my email. I'll do my best to answer it. If you would like to support this work with a donation, you can also find the details in the description. Previously, I was using some donation options that were a little difficult, and some of you did complain that they were a little difficult to use. So I did change, and I hope right now it should be a lot easier for you to send your donation, regardless of the country where you are sending it from, and regardless of the means you actually want to use to send. So you can go check it out and see if it is better now. So that is it for today. I hope this was a blessing. God bless you.